So we're back with our last part of class. So we've got our form. So we can enter a value in the form, submit it, and it shows up on the next page. Now, we talked a little bit before about post and get, and I wanted to be clear about the difference between them. I'm going to go back to my game details. If I change my form method, you don't have to change yours. I'm going to change it from post to get and resubmit my form. So I'm going to refresh it and submit. Now, first of all, I've broken the code here on line 10 because on line 10, it's looking for post values, which we don't have, but there's something else. My form did submit, it did send the value I entered in the form, but there's an issue with it. What's the issue if you look at my browser that we didn't have when I used post, but now that I've changed the method to get, it's creating a problem? What's the problem? If you look up at the top of the browser, my form works, but it's not a good way of doing things. How come? What's the problem here? How does that URL look to you? Can anybody see a problem with the URL? Or is it just me? No, well, it should be localhost for you. For me, it's localhost 800. But look at the full URL. I'm going to put the code back to post for a minute. So I'll change get to post. Refresh. So this is what I see when I use post. Right? It posts to save game. But if I use get and submit the same value, what's different about the URL when I use get? Right, Ariel. It shows the value I entered in the form. Well, what's wrong with that? So get put the value in the URL, but post didn't. Why would this be a problem? Ah, sorry. Okay, thanks. I didn't realize that. So what's wrong with this URL when I use get? Why don't we want the values the users type in our form to appear in the address bar? What's wrong with that? Well, it will still execute it. We can access it with get. Can you think of any kind of form inputs you don't want to be displayed as part of the URL? right? What if this was a payment form? Right, anything confidential. If this was a credit card number or a password, if our form uses get, what will happen with the values, the secure values the user's typing in the form? A bank account number, a password, a credit card. If the form uses get as the method, any values that users type, they wind up in the address bar. They get remembered by the browser history, and other people could visually see them. So get adds the form inputs as URL parameters that are visible. Post doesn't do this. So this is why we almost always, yes, and it does create an insanely long URL. So when I use post, there's no values here in the URL. So almost all the time we're going to use post. The only time we ever see get really is in search forms. Now there's a gotcha here. This is critical when you build forms. Every time we build an HTML form, we want to make sure we use method equals post. Here's why. If I take it out entirely, you don't have to do this on yours, I just want to show you. So my form has no method at all. Okay, it only has an action, but there's no method here. When I submit it, if I don't specify any method, which method will get called by default? Get or post? Get is actually the default HTTP method. So if we don't specify that our form has to use post, it's going to use get, which means all the form inputs get exposed in the address bar. Not safe. So this is one of the common gotchas when we're learning to work with forms. We should always get in the habit of using post for our forms. So this way, we don't see the inputs in the address bar. So we need to flesh out the rest of our form now. We've looked at post and get. We've got a title. But if a user is going to add a new game, we need to give them inputs for the other columns in the database. We don't need the game ID. The database will generate that automatically. We've got the title, but we also want a field for the release year and the rating. We'll leave the photo out for now. So on my form, I want to add two more field sets. So we'll have a label for, and I want to name it exactly. We had release year in camel case and rating. So my name will be release year in camel case, my ID. We'll say it's required. And how can we ensure we get numeric values, that the user can't type ABC as the release year? What kind of validator could we put on our input box? Yeah, Colton, we could do a date picker, but we're actually, then we'd have to put in a year, month, and day, which we may not know. This is called release year, so we really just need a number because we may not know the actual exact date. We just want to maybe put in the year. So which attribute that you see here in this list would let us control so that we can't get like an alpha character, only a number. Good guess, Colton. The value would be when we actually want, we will use value later on, yes. What we actually want right now is type. You are close. So what type do we want to set here? To make sure we only get digits in this input. Right. So if we add type equals number, users won't be allowed to put in alpha characters. And our last field set, we'll add one more label for the rating. And one more input. We won't make this one required. We'll just say name is rating and ID is rating. We'll just leave it at that. So here are the new fields for our form. So they go after our first field set, but before our button. So there's now going to be 3 field sets with a label and an input stacked vertically, and then there's a button at the bottom. I'll put this up on paste of code if you need it. Here's the link in the chat. So now our page looks like this. Right, we get a number picker. So now we could go ahead and add, for example, now this won't go to our database yet, but at least the form part is done. So we've set up 2 containers for game information. We've set up a table in the database, and we've set up a form on our web page so we can ask users to enter new games. And now we need to finish off the code in our save game page. We're already capturing the title, but we also want to capture the year and the rating. And then we need to connect to the database so we can save a new game with these inputs. So I'm going to go back to my save game page. This page is done for today. We'll do more work with it in a few weeks, but our form, it's done. So I'm going to go back to my save page. I'll modify my comment here. We don't just want to store the title. We want to store the values. We want to store the values entered in the form in variables. So we've got a title. I want to create 2 more variables. They'll start with $signs. So our release year is also going to come from our post, but it's going to read our second input. And I'm going to use the same name. My variable name is going to match the text box name. Let me just take out that echo. And I'll create a third variable for our rating. So that's step 1. Get the 3 values using post, because we want to save these into a new game record in the database. So then we're going to connect to the database using the same code we already wrote, we already worked with here on our connect page. We're going to connect to the database. We're going to set up the SQL insert command. to add a new game. And then we want to fill the insert parameters with our variables. So we kind of do this one step at a time. And then finally we execute the save and disconnect. So these are all the steps. So it's kind of like 6 steps here. First step is just get the values from the form, put them in variables. So we've done that here. Our connect and disconnect, we've already done those. So I'm just going to repeat them here. I'm going to create a new PDO connection to a MySQL database, and my host, same server we're using, and I'll put in my database name, my username, and my password, which I really struggle to remember. You could copy the line directly from your connect file if you wanted. But it's a good idea when we're starting out. The more you work with this line of code, the more you're going to learn about it and understand what it is we're doing. We're using the PDO library to connect to a MySQL database with this IP address, this database inside the server, using this login. And then we're going to set up our, actually, you know what I'll do first? Let's just try the page like this and make sure our connection works. If this page works properly, it should just be blank. As long as there's no error, it means getting these values and connecting to the database means it's working properly. So before we get into the complicated part, let's just make sure that everything's working okay so far. So use your connection from your connect line, and we're going to store the title, the release year, and the rating from our form into variables. So if I submit and get a blank screen, that means we're good so far, if there's no errors here. Nothing's actually saved to the database yet. We haven't written that code, but so far, what we do have on the save game page seems to be right. So now we want to set up our insert. And you probably haven't done this with Mozilla yet, but here's the syntax for saving a new record into a MySQL database. It's going to be insert into games. And then we open a set of round brackets, and we have to specify in order the columns we want to put data into. So we're going to save the title, the release year, and the rating. So this is the destination. This is where the values are going. We're creating a record in the games table, and we're going to put values into the title column, the release year column, and the rating column. We're going to ignore the photo column for a while. And then what we're going to set up here are 3 placeholders, 3 parameters, and these are defined by this colon. So I'm going to create 3 parameters called colon title, colon release year, and colon rating. So the colon is special. So the colon indicates a placeholder or parameter. So we haven't run the command yet, we're just setting it up. This is the instruction we are going to execute in a minute. So we've got these three placeholders here, one for the title, one for the release year, and one for the rating. And now we need to populate each placeholder with the proper variable. So we want to inject our title variable from our form into the title parameter. We want to take the release year variable from our form into the release year, and we want to put the rating in. We don't technically need these placeholders. We could just put the variables right in here, but it's not very safe. I'll show you why. So we've got this extra step of creating placeholders and then filling them. Here's why we need to use these parameters. I know this is new, it's a bit confusing. What if somebody enters a game title like this? What would happen if we just take whatever title they entered and put that in as, say, our game title here? But for the game title, the user actually puts in an SQL command. This is a kind of hacking attempt. Anybody know what this is called? When users put code into web forms to try and get that code to execute and break things. What would this command I've highlighted in blue, what would it do? Drop table games. What would that do inside our database if it executed? Yeah, it would delete the table and all the data inside it. So I could just, take my title variable here from line 10. I could just put it in here. This would work, but it leaves us open to this kind of attack. It's called an Sql Injection Attack, where a hacker is trying to run SQL commands in our database to cause havoc. So by using these placeholders instead, it does checking to prevent these kinds of attacks. So I'm going to create one more variable where we're connecting up. Yeah, right. It's a great idea, David. We want to take our database connection and our SQL command, and we're going to connect them together. So we take our database variable and we call the prepare method. So this is built into PHP. So we're going to connect the DB connection with the SQL command. And then before we can execute the command, we need to fill our three parameters. So we use this funky syntax. We're going to take our command, and it has a bind parameter method. So one at a time, we're going to populate our three parameters. So our title parameter is going to be filled from our title variable on line 10. And we're going to specify this value is a string parameter that's 50 characters maximum. So we can't save a game title longer than 50 characters. So that fills our title. We need to do the same thing now with the release year and the rating. I realize it's a fair bit of code. Unfortunately, we can't really do it in pieces. We have to kind of complete it in order to try it out. So I'm going to call bind param 2 more times. We want to bind the release year to our variable from line 11, which starts with a $sign. This one's going to be an integer parameter. And it doesn't have a length. Only the strings have a length. And lastly, we're going to fill our rating from our rating variable. I can't remember how long we said the rating would be. So if I look back in the database, we said rating is 10 characters maximum. So we'll set a limit here as well. So we're creating these placeholders or parameters here, and then we're going to populate them from the 3 variables we created up at the top. To execute the save, we just take our command variable and we call the execute. So once line 28 runs, if this works correctly, we should actually have a new game in the database. And to disconnect, we just set our connection to null. The last thing I'll maybe just do is print a message that says game saved. So I'm going to try all this code out, fill out my form, hit save, and then we'll go and look in the database and see if there's anything there. So I'm going to go back here. I'll try adding a game. You can put in any values you want. I'll hit save. Tells me my game was saved. I will share the code in a minute, but I don't want to share it until I'm sure it's proper and correct. So now I'm going to go back here. I'll maybe make just a new query tab. How can I check the games table? What command could I run so I can see all the data in the table? You've probably done this in your database class. What command do we use to retrieve information? Starts with an S, the command we need. You got it. I'm going to select, make this a little bigger. So I'm going to select star, meaning select all the rows from games. So if I execute this command, I now have one game here. Game ID 10,000 with the title, the release year, and the rating. And our photo is just null. That's fine. So our code seems to work. I'm going to go ahead and save one more, and then I'll share the code. Anybody want to suggest another game? What's the last video game you played? What's your favorite game?
The last game I played was Pokemon Infinite Fusion, and my favorite game is Honkai Impact 3rd.
Okay, well, let's add a bunch of these. Okay, so Dark Souls. David, what release year and what's the rating for Dark Souls? Okay, rating is M. Yep, use your best Google foo. Find the year for Dark Souls. Then I'll add Tetris. Jake, if you can look up the rating and the year for Tetris, I'll add that. Okay, so 2011. So I'm going to save. Tells me game was saved. If I go back to MySQL and run my query again, right now I've got 2. And it automatically assigns the next ID number. So I'm going to go back. Jake, can you? Okay, thank you. All right. So Tetris, 1984. All right. I was in middle school in 1984. I remember when Tetris came out. Okay, so I'm going to save that one. Right, so now I've got 3. So our save is working. Okay, so our code's right. I'm just going to do one more thing with it. Actually, you know what? I will upload it. I'm going to upload it to GitHub, and then I'm also just going to deploy it to the AWS web server so I can try it out live on the web as well. So just let me push a new version of this. Now you can use my code, but you'll obviously have to change the database. Yep, I just did. Jake, it's in the link. So I'm going to continually update this repository. So every week, it's going to be in the same link. I'll keep adding. So it says 2 commits. So you'll be able to see the version. So lesson 2, part 1, with a description of what we did. Okay, and GitHub even shows you, we're going to learn to use it probably in a couple weeks. It even shows you what changes. So where you see green, that's new code. Where you see red, that's code that got deleted. So I'm going to teach you how to use this in a couple of weeks. Okay, so that one link, all the code will always be here. So the last thing I'm going to do, I'm going to add one more game. But now I'm going to connect by FTP, and I want to put this website up on AWS. It's working on localhost, but I also want to just try it. So I'll go into my public folder, and I'm going to upload my PHP gaming site. I'm going to upload the whole folder. That way it'll be separate from any other files I have on the server. So now I'm going to try it on AWS. So I can go to lamp.computerstudies, put in my username, PHP gaming. So here's my form. Okay, Legend of Zelda. So Mike, can you find a year and rating for this one, please? Thank you. Oh, you're good. That's fast. So 2000, rated E. Okay, so my page is working on the server as well, right? If I go back and check my query, right? So I was able to add 3 records from the local version of my page, and then when I upload it to AWS, I could also connect to my database. So I've got 4 games in my game inventory so far. So what we want to do next week is we want to start to retrieve, to select this information out of the database, and we want to be able to display it on a PHP page. We want to be able to show a list of games. We want to be able to put the titles like in a drop-down list. And also we want to be able to go and fetch an individual game. If the user picks one game, we want to be able to show them all the information about that game. Remember I said last week, all web programming is create, read, update, and delete with a database. So today we've kind of started to do the create part. Next week we'll start reading the data. And then we can start putting these things together. We're going to have what, is going to soon start to look like a functioning web application that's similar to the kinds of websites web applications that you use all the time. So we're going to stop for today. Okay, I've already uploaded all my code to GitHub. The link is in the chat. The link is also here on Blackboard. And I will also upload today's video lessons to YouTube a little later this afternoon. It takes WebEx usually a while to finish processing them. So the playlist is here. My GitHub page will take you right here. And if you go into my repositories, here's our PHP gaming. So I'll just keep updating all the code we do each week. It'll always be in here if you miss anything or you need to refer to anything. I know a few people may still need a little bit of help. If you don't have questions, you don't need help, have a great week, and I will see you next week. Remember your quiz, to do your quiz before next week, by next Tuesday. I will stay and keep the WebEx room open for a little while to try and offer help to anybody who needs it. Yes, Colton. Yes, I'll be able to help you. Okay, you too, David. Thanks.